Got my TPR hat on because today we're going to put the last finishing touches of our TPR components on our RZR XPTS. All right, guys, so if you've been following along, we've been doing a ton of work on our sailboat restoration project, but today's video is a little different because we have desert season right around the corner. So I have a lot of videos that we're doing for the sailboat. You're gonna see some massive progress very, very quickly, but today we're gonna focus in on getting our RZR ready to go for the desert. And we did some installation of some pretty amazing aftermarket parts, and I'm gonna walk you through it. All right, guys, so if you've been following our build, we plan on turning the XPTS project up. We want to get some tunes going into it, increase that horsepower. Our XPTS project, if you're not aware, is a RZR XP Turbo that we basically converted over to an S. It already has long travel. It's got upgraded shocks. It also is going to have a lot of motor components that are going to basically increase its performance, which we're going to go through. But before we do that, we want reliability. And that's where Total Performance Racing comes in. They make these beautiful components that help create that reliability so you can tune the car, turn up the boost, and still have success. So let me show you what parts we're putting on. Okay, so you might have already seen that we've installed the breather kit on the XPTS. That is in the previous video, so you can go back and watch that. So today we're polishing things off with a couple extra awesome components. So first off, we've got this beautiful billet TPR valve. It's a valve cover basically, but what it allows you to do is it allows you to upgrade some components. So first off, this has cam oilers in it with an oil line, which is going to reach down into where the turbo gets its oil. It's going to add additional oil and lubrication up around the cams, which is really important. The other thing this does, it allows you to convert over to MSD ignition. So this is similar to what is being run in the RZR Pro models. So this is basically going to upgrade the old coil ignition to this new MSD ignition, and this guy accounts for that. The additional thing it does, it allows us to upgrade to TPR's full flow kit for cooling. And basically what it's going to do is make it easier to bleed the cooling system on the RZR. So if you ever overheat, that's not going to be an issue. You're not going to have to deal with putting the car in an awkward position. This makes it super easy to bleed. And then on top of it, it's changing the high point. So that way the head is getting the proper cooling. These are known to have an issue where they don't get the proper cooling. There's an air bubble up in the head that ends up causing heat and problems. Well, we're going to eliminate that with their full flow water kit. Another problematic area with these cars is the timing chain tensioner. So we're going to go to their beautiful billet manual mechanical timing chain tensioner. I'm going to show you how we're going to install that. This is a great upgrade. And then while we're at it, we are also going to upgrade the intercooler to this beautiful TPR designed Garrett intercooler. This guy is going to make sure that you have more efficiency. It's also going to help prevent these from cracking or leaking, which the stock ones are known for doing. It also has a bleeder system on it as well to, again, aid in the bleeding. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through installing all of these components on the car right now. These are all things that can easily be installed if you have just some decent mechanical ability. You don't have to be a pro to be able to do this. I'm going to show you how easy it is. You don't even really need to tear the car apart too much, but we're going to get these components all installed today, and I'm going to walk you through the process in the way that I'm going to do it. So a couple things you're going to want to acquire before you start this project is if you're doing just the valve cover alone without the full flow kit or the intercooler, you won't need this. But if you're going to do that, you're going to want some radiator fluid. You also should go ahead and buy a brand new valve cover gasket because you're going to have this all torn apart. It's a great opportunity to put a fresh gasket in there. And then also you're going to want some kind of contact cleaner because you're going to need to be cleaning some parts up as you go and get everything installed. So having these things already on hand is going to save you a trip to the store in the middle of the project. All right, so one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to push the car out of the garage. I am not going to start it because if you're doing the timing chain tensioner, you need to make sure the car has been completely cool for at least 6 hours. So I don't want to have to let it sit around. I want to do the timing chain tensioner all at once. While it doesn't need to be done at the same time these other components are being done, it does make it a lot easier and more accessible. So this is a great opportunity for me to take advantage of doing that. So we're going to push the car out so it's easier to work on, and then I'll just kind of show you where we go from here. All right, for me, the next step is because I do have the DRT trunk kit on my car. I'm just going to be taking the lid off. If you don't have the trunk kit, then all you're going to be doing is just taking off the access panel, which makes it easier to get to the air filter and the head. So there's our head right there. So again, just to make it a little easier, I'm going to get this out of the way so it's easier to film and easier for me to get to. All right, so now that we've got our trunk out of the way, we're going to take the muffler off so that way we can access the charge cooler and remove the lines and drain the coolant. Okay, so I did take this little subframe and loosened it up so it'd hang out of the way, just give me more room. I've got all the 8mm bolts out. So now this guy's just sitting in here. So we're gonna carefully lift it out. It can be full of coolant, so you wanna be careful it doesn't make a mess and spill everywhere. Okay, so I just cleaned the surface around the O-ring. One thing I want you to notice, that is oil, which was down inside of this chamber in here. So you want to make sure you get down in there and clean that out really well, just to get that oil out of there. There's more of it. So this goes back to why you want to run TPR's breather system. So you can keep the oil out of this from that excessive, crankcase pressure, blowing that oil back in through the intake. So again, cleaning this out, get it nice and clean to start with. Now that we have our breather on, that's not going to be an issue. So we're going to finish cleaning this up and we're going to carefully put the new charge cooler from Garrett TPR right there. So they do provide you this very handy little tool to help get these fittings on and off. I just realized I have to remove the top fitting so that I can access this bolt. Okay, so I've just got them on here just slightly snug, and now we're going to go through and get the torque wrench, and we're going to torque these down to 9 foot-pounds. All right, so now we're going to put our fitting back in now that we've got our bolt there torqued down. There's just O-rings on these, so there's no need for a thread sealer. And now we're going to use the special tool they provide. So once you get it fairly tight, now you can attach a 3/8 inch drive to it. Making sure it's nice and snug. All right, so these two guys are both nice and snug. So now we're gonna be able to put our AN fittings that are gonna going off to our coolant lines. But before we do that, we are going to leave these lines off because right now is a good time to be able to access this side of the car to be able to take care of our timing chain tensioner. Okay, so while we're right here, we're just gonna loosen up this little clamshell right here, removing these lines. It's gonna make it a lot easier to get to the flywheel sensor. And then we're just gonna move these lines out of the way, and now it's gonna be really easy to access everything to do our timing chain tensioner. So again, you don't have to do this, but this does make the job a little easier. So if you're doing the timing chain tensioner at the same time that you're doing the charge cooler, this is the optimal opportunity to do it. So now, right behind this bolt, which is where I took off those coolant lines, we have our timing chain tensioner. So we're gonna be able to take that guy off. And we also have our flywheel, I believe it's called a flywheel or sensor. But anyways, this little sensor right here, which is gonna allow you to look down inside and rotate the engine and make sure it's at top dead center. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna go and we're gonna remove this guy. Just a little 8mm bolt. So before we remove the factory timing chain tensioner, we've got to go down in here and we've got to find the little plus symbol. Don't know if you can see it. It's right down inside of there, right off of that little rectangle. And then in addition to that, we need to make sure that the cam lobe is pointing to the rear of the car. Okay? TPR has a great video on this. You can watch their video, but I have done that, so now I can remove the factory timing chain tensioner, and then I can put in the TPR one. Okay, so there is our manual timing chain tensioner. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove this gasket, clean everything up, and we'll put our new TPR one in there. Okay, so this is what it's supposed to look like after I took the tensioner off. The gasket actually stuck to the actual head or cylinder. So what you're going to do is you're going to remove the gasket. You want to remove all the material so it's super nice and clean, because this is using an O-ring system as opposed to a gasket. Just make sure you don't get any debris that goes down inside of there. You want to keep that clean. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our TPR tensioner. I have it all the way backed out, so this is seated. I made sure my O-ring is seated. The TPR logo goes up. And then what we're going to do, just going to slide it up in here, and then we're going to add the 2 bolts that TPR provides, and we're going to Loctite them, and we're going to torque them to 11 foot-pounds. So we have screwed this. So once we got the factory one out and we put our new one in, we have screwed this guy all the way in hand tight, no tools. We're going to take a very close look at where it's at, and we're now going to go 1 full turn out. And then now we're going to go also another 1/4 of a turn. So right there. Okay, so now we are going to hold this guy still, and we're going to bring our lock nut in, and this will hold it placed. So again, all the way in 1 full turn, all the way until it seats by hand, then 1 full turn out, and then another 1/4 out. And that's the setting. Okay, so from here, we're gonna take our valve cover off. I've already removed my oil fill cap. I've also pulled out the 2 coils for the spark plugs. So we have 4 bolts right here. We're gonna remove these 4 bolts, and then we're gonna carefully take this guy off, not to get a bunch of dust and dirt down in the whole cam valve area. All right, so we're gonna drop down through. We have to navigate it down into this cavity a little bit. And then it's gonna come right up through. And she's made provisions for it to come all the way up. So now we're gonna carefully maneuver our valve cover. There we go. Don't want to, careful of the gasket. Make sure the gasket stays in place. Got to really take your time with this part. For example, my gasket came a little bit unseated, so I want that always seated properly. Feels good. So this guy can now start working its way in. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get our bolts started with some new rubber little guys here that TPR provides. But that's looking pretty good. Okay, so we have new little rubber spacers, which are going to go on these 3. we are going to reuse, except for this guy here is the new center one we're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and get these three guys in first. This one does use a thread locker, and these are all going to be torqued to 9 foot-pounds. So for the water flow kit, we are going to torque that guy to 22 foot-pounds with a 1/2 inch socket. Or excuse me, a 12 millimeter socket. There it is, 22 foot-pounds. The rest of these guys, we're going to do at 9 foot-pounds. And that is going to include the smaller extra ARP bolt that's going in there. Okay, those are all at 9. So now we're going to get our final bolt, which is also going to use a red Loctite to make sure it stays in place. Okay, everything's seated and looks good. So we're going to be putting in our ignitions. We're going to be tapping in for our oil, cam oilers, and then we're going to be running our water line to the rest of our full flow kit to again eliminate that possible air bubble up here in the head and causing excessive heat. This is our breather line. We're going to have to figure out how that's going to route. We're also going to uninstall over here. We're going to take out the coil system because we're putting our MSD ignition in it. All right, so here we just take off this little bolt, which is a 10 millimeter. This drops down, and I'm gonna take out this little bolt and save it. Now this ignition, we need to make sure we reattach this wire to the ground. The rest of this is just gonna unplug and be removed. There we go. So that is out of here. So this is a very plug and play for the MSD. It's super simple. One of the nice things that it's going to do, it's going to eliminate the when you get an aftermarket charge tube like this aftermarket Assassin's one, you're going to have the wires be really stretched. This is going to eliminate all that. This is basically converting the ignition system to a similar system as what they use in all the newer razors like the Pro and all those. They all use this type of, they call it like stick ignition or coil ignition or electronic ignition. A lot of guys call it different things. So we're just going to plug this guy in, very plug and play. So here's our new harness. They provide a nice bolt. Now remember, we don't want to skip this wire, so we're going to put this on here as well. So these guys are going to go right through here. The little nut that goes underneath it. It's a nice new hardware. Okay, so that guy is taken care of, nice and tight. And then this is our harness. So again, plug and play. Here we go. All right, so that's plugged in. Now these two guys are just going to plug right into the brand new MSD ignitions. All right, so the MSD ignitions go right in here. There is a little cup that comes with it that sits on the gasket. So all you have to do is go to the one that says MSD. We're going to drop this down in here. Make sure it seats. Now there is a small aluminum spacer and a bolt to hold it in place. Same thing for the other side. Make sure it seats properly. Drop it down in. There we go. So now we just have our cords that plug right in, and it's already labeled PTO and mag. So this one goes to PTO, this one goes to mag, and then we'll be able to clean up that wiring so it's nice and secure. But it's that simple. So we've got our ignitions installed. So we still need to hook up our oil cooler, or sorry, our oilers, our cam oiler line, and our flow line. So these two lines are gonna drop down and out of the way, and they're gonna tie in down below. Once we get those tied in, we're very close to starting the car and getting it back up and running. Now, you can use your stock breather cap. I have the TPR breather system, so I am gonna need to reroute my line in a little bit different configuration because it will conflict with these. So I might have to change out my fitting, but no big deal. They already include that extra fitting when you buy their breather kit, so you're gonna have what you need there. But looking really good. Everything's all torqued down right where it needs to be. So we're gonna drop down to the back side of the car. Let's get the cam oilers hooked up, and let's get the rest of our full flow breather coolant system going here. There are washers on the back side of this, so you need to be careful. So we're gonna put our new piece in. Oops. Don't forget your washer. So one on each side of this fitting. So this is our cam oiler line. This is gonna run right up back into the head. And there we go. All right, so that line's tightened up and ready to go. And that line will run back up top to the head. Okay, so for the full flow water kit, we have to tap into this coolant line. It is the outer line directly behind your camming or your timing chain tensioner. So the nice thing about this is the fitting that's up in there is really difficult to get to. You do not have to take this hose off. We're just gonna measure down 4.5 inches from the start of the hose, mark it with a Sharpie, and then we're just gonna cut it. And when we cut it, we're gonna be putting in line a fitting, which is gonna then feed the coolant all the way up top to the very, very top of the head where we added that port on our valve cover. So to do this, I'm gonna do my best to show you. We're gonna kind of hook it on the back of this, and we're gonna lay it out. And right there, that is 4.5 inches down. So I mark that with the Sharpie, and then where we're gonna cut it is with a tubing cutter normally used for irrigation pipe. So here's our tubing cutter. So we're just gonna put it right on that line. And I have my bucket underneath here, my drip pan, just in case I get some coolant. And there's some coolant. And there it is. So a little bit left. And there we go. Okay, so I've loosened up the hose clamps. I'm gonna put one down below. This is our fitting that goes in line. We want it to be facing upward. The coolant line is gonna go up. So we can, and this is gonna have some coolant in it, so I'm just pouring some of it out. There we go. So this guy, you're gonna have to work it in there. You want a good tight fit. Okay, so I believe we want to be right about there because we want this guy to be accessible. This is our breather, and we're gonna use this if we ever have to bleed the car, which we will do after this installation, but also if the car ever runs into an issue. So the bottom end looks good. So we're gonna come in and we're just gonna tighten up our hose clamp. And then we're basically gonna do the very same thing up here for the top. You don't have to remove any material, which is nice. And again, this is gonna be our new method of bleeding. So now we're gonna take our breather line and we're gonna route this right up top, and it's going to attach right here. This is a little flare fitting, so there is no thread, sealant, or Teflon tape required. And this is just gonna go right up top to that fitting we installed on the top of the head. There we go, nice and snug. So now we're gonna be able to go up top and hook up our oil and fluid lines back up there. And we're also now finally able to bring these coolant lines back up into play. So you might remember these guys, they're gonna mount right here. And you can see with these here, stuff's kind of in, they're definitely in the way of doing this job. So having these put back on last is definitely the way to go, in my opinion. And we've got our fittings back here we're gonna look at in a moment. Okay, so it's gonna be a little difficult to see, but right up in here, we have our two coolant lines, 1 and 2. So what we're gonna be doing is we're using these new nice 90-degree and fittings. So we're getting rid of that molded tube design, so it's a lot cleaner install. So we're just gonna cut off the end of the hose here to where it's straight, and then we're able to angle and adjust these, and they're gonna go right into place. And then we have our hose clamps, and then they also provide some additional clamps too, just in case. So we're gonna use that same cutter that we used to be able to cut back here, and we're just gonna cut these guys off, and we're gonna attach them and tighten everything down. And then, other than putting the exhaust and some heat shield stuff back on, this whole end of the car is complete. We still have to purge the system, which I'm going to show you as well, which is going to be super easy with this new full flow kit. All right, so we're gonna get this one all the way seated first, get this clamp back on, then we're gonna seat the second one, and then we'll tighten these guys down. And then our lines will be nice and clean and run and ready to go. Do need to tighten up this last fitting. We're gonna use this special little tool that TPR provides. That again just works with a 1/4 inch extension, and it allows us to get it back up in there and get that guy torqued down properly. Okay, so for our oil breather, or oiler, cam oiler, sorry, we're just gonna pop this little plug out. This guy comes right out, and that exposes our line, which we're gonna screw right into there. So for this guy, we're just gonna loosen it up, and it just spins right down in. And then there's an O-ring in there for it to seat. And then once you get it seated with the O-ring, which is right about there, there's a little set screw to tighten it. And then we have our flared fitting right there. Everything that TPR does is so clean, put together really well. All right, so we're just gonna need to take a little open-ended wrench and tighten these two guys up. And then for our full flow water kit, just gonna go right here. Sometimes you gotta just wiggle the fitting to get it going. That's seated. So we'll just again put a wrench there. So this guy is going to our breather system, which has, or sorry, the coolant system, which is running the coolant through here, so we can get the full flow. And then this is our cam oilers, which is going to spray oil all over those cams to make sure that they're getting oiled and lubricated correctly, because it is an area of concern, especially as we start, you know, bumping up the power. All right. So I went ahead and put everything back together off camera because it's all going to vary on your car, but I've got the little framework back there, the heat shield, the muffler. This guy's all reconnected. I've got this heat shield back in place, which I removed to be able to slide the valve cover in and out. So to give you an idea on how easy this stuff is to access, that little silver guy right there. So that is the breather for the new charge cooler. And then right down here, that guy right there, that is our valve to bleed the coolant system. So all very accessible. Now with this valve, you could reach it with a long flathead, but you do not want to over tighten that. You will break it. So they do give you a special little tool that's designed to do so. The screwdriver, if you're using it, you just got to be very delicate. That's the important thing. And then also there is our, right here, it's our timing tensioner, which is also accessible without a problem. So everything is all buttoned back up and ready to go. Up top, I've got cut a couple zip ties, but everything wired up. I've rerun my breather with a 45 degree right down through there. You do have to, in my particular case, because I have this very large charge tube and it's aluminum, you do have to take off the fitting when you remove the oil fill cap. Not really a big deal. Again, this is associated with the breather. If you're not running the breather, you won't have to worry about that, but I recommend the breather. These guys are tightened down, got our MSD all secure. So everything's looking good. So at this point, it is time to add coolant and start it up. And yeah, let's basically bleed the cooling system and we'll be ready to give it a rip. All right, so coolant is topped off. I went a slight bit over, which is fine because there's going to be air in the system. So we're going to probably have this drop down a little bit anyway. So now at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to purge the charge cooler first, and I'll show you how we do that. So on our charge cooler, we're just going to reach in here. We're going to unscrew this little cap. Don't lose it. There we go. So you can see this is a Schrader valve. So we're just holding this valve in. I heard a little bit of air come out. We're going to let it hold for about, we're going to hold that in for about 30 seconds. So now we're going to very carefully take a little flathead. You can also, again, use the key. We're going to open that valve. You can see coolant dripping out of it. Okay, so at this point, we are ready to start the car. We are going to basically see how it starts up. Again, the only thing really different that should affect it starting is the ignition. We're also going to make sure that it doesn't throw any codes. When you do switch over to the MSD ignition, there can be a possibility, if you're running tunes, which we are, that it could run a code or throw a code. If it does throw a code, it's not a big deal. We'll be able to contact Aftermarket Assassins and they can send us an updated tune that will address that code. So that's not a problem, something that's easily taken care of, but we'll see if we even have to deal with that. So let's see what happens. And you might hear the fan kick on. Wow, fires right up. No codes. Okay, so our coolant has gone down, which is good. So that shows that we are bleeding the system and it's taking that extra coolant. So we're going to top it back off and we are going to repeat the same process. Okay, at this point, it's very important to remove a section of the heat shield before reinstalling the trunk. Some of the newer components sit up a little bit taller and can actually rub on the heat shield, causing problems. TPR provides this template to help in clearing the area correctly. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove the heat shield from the trunk. That's simple. All right, so from here, I simply drew a line right across the top of the ridge, and then per the chart, which I'll include in the video, I just marked the spots that we need to drill. So we're doing a 2.5 inch hole, a 2.5 inch hole, and then a 1 3/4. I'm gonna probably just do a 2.5, 2.5, and just connect the dots so I have a nice big oval here to make sure there's plenty of clearance for the parts not hitting. All right, there we go. So we're back together and we have clearanced out our area. So that way our 2 ignition coils and our full flow water kit are not going to be rubbing up against the metal, causing damage as the bed flexes. All right, so that's going to wrap up our installation on our TPR parts. Just so you know, we've been running these parts since about midway of last season and they have performed flawlessly. I am super happy with them. So for upcoming videos, we've got a lot of content coming on the progress we've been making on our sailboat restoration, but also a lot more desert prep work. And we're going to be starting to hit the dunes and the hard pack very, very soon. So if you found the video helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, or helping us out on Patreon.